Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the Mine World podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to mining innovators and industry implementers of all kinds of new technology and so on, and investors in mining and mining innovation and so on. And today, on the Mine World podcast, we're joined by one of South Africa's most recognizable and I also like to say refreshingly candid voices in mining. Bernard Swanepoel, welcome to the Mine World podcast.
Thank you, MP, and it's really a privilege to be joining you and your listeners.
Yes, thanks a lot. So, Bernard's career is the stuff of mining legend, I should say, at least here in South Africa it is. So, from shift boss to CEO of Harmony Gold, where he transformed struggling operations into the world's fifth largest gold producer. That's quite an accolade. And Bernard, you did it through what became known as the Harmony Way, which was culture driven, no excess approach to or no excuses and no excesses. I remembered doing business with Harmony in previous companies, and there was always this caveat to business that don't come with fancy things. We're going to be pragmatic about business, and I appreciated that. And so today, also as chairman of the Joburg Indaba, executive chairman of the Manganese Metal Company, and founder of To The Point Growth Specialists, Bernard continues to challenge the industry orthodoxy, whether it's cost leadership or ESG or electrification or legislation or the hype around AI and automation. Those are all topics that I've heard you talk about, Bernard, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. I like reading your zero bullshit newsletter on LinkedIn or however you want to pronounce it. You've got the benefit of putting the little asterisk there when it's written, but when it's spoken, I guess it's just spoken like it said.
Indeed,
and it's become essential reading for those who want straight talk about mining and leadership and South Africa's economic culture. So, yeah, it's good to have you on the podcast, Bernard. Maybe for those that don't know, how did you become involved in mining? How did that happen?
I think, like many of my time, I was sort of going through school. Parents were blue-collar workers. My dad actually worked on the platinum mines in Rustenburg as a surface carpenter. He lost his job when I was grade 11, and so grade 12, I was living with the neighbors. I was sort of bright enough to go to varsity or did adequately at school, nothing spectacular. And the bursary I could get was for mining engineering through the then Union Corporation. So that's how I got into mining. And I must say, a 45-year career happened by that was the opportunity. To be fair, obviously in those days you had to be male and white in order to go and study mining engineering. So let me not tell a victim story here. I couldn't study without a bursary, and that was for mining engineering. But you also had to be white and male to be allowed to study mining engineering.
Participate.
Yeah, and so I then never looked back. I mean, I still had to do my 2 years military service, and when I was done with that, despite getting the bursary in Rustenburg in the platinum industry, I was sent to the gold side of the business. I started off on Grootvlei, the infamous Grootvlei that was struggling even then, and of course those are the things that form your career. If you go to a mine where the unions was first recognized, you get to meet Cyril Ramaphosa and the then union leadership, but you also get to face the challenges of an industry that was different to the one that everybody else knew, and so I was really historically at a fortunate time at the right place. I sort of was exposed to tough gold mining, and I was exposed to a world where other stakeholders like unions were much more significant. And that was really my whole start of my career and everything since.
You talk about tough mining and so on, and it's often said that mining is not for sissies, so to speak. but the mining industry is not, firstly, it's not monolithic. It's different in different areas, but it's also different in different ages. Would you say that the South African mining industry now is maybe tougher than what it was 20, 30 years ago? Was it tougher then? How would you compare the two?
I have this discussion often with current sort of leadership. And there's a view that to be a mine manager today in South Africa is almost impossible. And I respect it. It's very challenging. I mean, the environment in which our managers operate today are truly, truly challenging. And then the other part of me says, yeah, but when I was young, things were also tough. And that's also true, you know. I do think today the demands on leaders in the mining industry is different. I mean, you really need to be able to manage all stakeholders. Now, just go back and think, where do we come from? By the time you become a mine manager or a CEO, you typically got promoted there on your technical skills. You were fantastic as an accountant, as an engineer, as a whatever. You know, you could do things, you could get things to be done, you could get machines to, you know, function. And suddenly those are the skills that got you there, but they're not the skills that are going to make you successful. And I think that journey of from technical expertise to being able to lead people, I think that journey is a similar journey to what I had to go through. My generation were fortunate that we got there in our mid-30s because of how the country changed. No, so I think the constant journey, the individual journey of going from technical expertise to, in time, you need to develop your leadership skills. Very, very similar. I think nowadays the industry really, I don't see many opportunities of entrusting young people. I find that a pity because I think young people still think differently, find innovation easier, adopt technology easier. And I think perhaps if I have one criticism, I think in today's world, if you're not 50, you're not experienced enough. And of course, experience is fantastic, but I think we lose out on some other things at MB.
And it is a continuous tension, right? The tension between experience and let's call it a currency of nowadays specifically digital skills and so on. And it's not a simple matter, I guess, as leadership in any company to judge which is the most important and what's the appropriate mix of people to have within your company, because you have to have both, right? You can't do without either one of those two. Now, speaking of tensions, you know, our industry is also in a lot of tension or experiencing a lot of tension. You know, not only generally in the mining industry globally, but also specifically South Africa has its own challenges. The industry is, many would say, experiencing rapid decline, at least when it comes to volumes and investment it is. But there are also pockets of bright stars and so on.
Yeah.
What do you see maybe as the central tension or the central challenge in South African mining today?
I think it is the issue of trust, and that is worldwide, but specifically in South Africa, there are always dynamics. There's the trust of the political elite, you know, didn't come from the same background as the business elite, and that is a built-in narrative, you know, like you know, that will be with us for some time. Trust is also the typical challenges that mining companies is seen as exploitative, a net negative, not a net positive. And then there are the horror stories that confirm that. Now, of course, we can sit here and say 98% of mining companies are responsible. And I believe it's a high number, whatever that number is. However, of course, in certain cycles, like right now with the gold price, you then get zamas and you get disasters like the Buffelsfontein underground, you know, disaster with, you know, 70 odd people dying. I mean, so this is the thing. It always comes back to, are we a trusted participant in the communities? And do we do enough? And I am so proud of what we do as an industry. I'm so proud of what we do relative to 30 and 40 and 100 years ago. But clearly that we aren't doing enough. Then the trust also comes to, and does the government trust us to be custodians of the national inheritance? Do we trust the government to make rules that is fair? Can us and our union sit around the table and talk about shared value creation? Or is it that it's only a pie and it's shrinking, and therefore let's fight for the biggest slice in the short term? So trust to me is the big thing. And I think if we approach the challenges of our industry from that perspective, there's almost no conversation that can't be held more constructively. Does young people trust the industry enough to join it? How will we run the industry if young, bright people, would rather sit and work in a bank than work in a mine, etc.? So it is just a lens which I think brings some clarity and some bluntness and honesty to conversations. Is put our credentials on the table, test whether we trust each other. And without going into the detail, that's exactly the platform that the Joburg Indaba has become. In the next 2 days, literally tomorrow and the day after, 40, 50, 60 of the top South African mining industry people, from the CEOs to the minister, are all going to be openly engaging each other, and try and build more trust. Not necessarily agreement. Agreement is, will we ever agree on everything? Perhaps not.
I personally think agreement is slightly overrated.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree, and that's also the point of tolerance. If we agreed on everything, we wouldn't have never had to tolerate anything.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly important that we identify what we disagree about and that we tolerate the difference. But that's not the end point, right? That's the starting point, because you trust the other person to work with you, even though they don't share your worldview, maybe even, or your goals, your departure point in argumentation, and so on. Yeah, so I think, platforms like the Johannesburg Indaba plays an incredibly big role in establishing that platform for conversation to be had, and for public conversation to be had.
Yeah, and that was really my obsession is, when we started it, there's sort of like, we were told, but there are conversations taking place behind closed doors. I hear you. But that's not what the world needs. They need to see us engaging publicly, and we are achieving that. I do want to just touch back, because I think it's going to be so visible, as the country, the narrative of a sunset industry comes from the demise of our gold mining industry. Now, when I joined gold mining in the early 80s, that was the last time the gold price went berserk, like now. Again, there was the crisis. This time we called it the Trump crisis. That time it was another crisis, the oil crisis, and the aftermath of that. And South Africa produced 70% of the world's gold, and the rand was stronger than the dollar on a one-to-one basis. And from then on, gold mining in South Africa has been on a decline, in sheer volumes. Now, that then creates a narrative. South Africa is gold mining is South Africa, and that's a sunset industry. Yes, so it's true. And I'm very proud that almost 20 years after I've left Harmony continued to produce excellent results in South African mining. And so the death of South African gold mining was overstated, and Harmony has played a role in that. Very proud of that. However, let's move to platinum. We are in platinum where we were in gold. The world cannot live without the PGMs that come from South Africa. We are totally dominant. And through our companies, we also are involved in the palladium mining of Stillwater and the platinum mining of Zimbabwe. So when we have our platinum day, we have all but Norilsk, and Norilsk joins us. Then we have like 100% of the world's PGM producers in one forum. It is doing very well. It will continue to be a significant driver. Coal is an emotive issue, But South Africa happens to need coal for our own coal power stations. And in the process, we mine and export to India and China that continues to need it. We don't even talk about manganese, where we are dominant. And manganese goes into everything, from steel to batteries and chrome. If you talk chrome, everybody knows you talk about South Africa. So this narrative of gold as a sunset industry, firstly, is overstated, thanks to Harmony and others. And secondly, you can't just roll that out and say, and therefore mining in South Africa is in decline. Through mechanization, automation, modernization, of course, mines typically employ less people. You know, I mean, that's a statement of fact. Better contribution to our economy, to our GDP. I mean, it is just phenomenal. I mean, you know, between mining and agriculture and tourism, we will have a country, regardless of who runs the US or what madness takes place in other parts of the world. So sorry for being a mining, advocate, but South Africa is so well endowed. Of course, we screw up so many things. Of course, we don't do other things right. But let's just start with the fact our potential is still there.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you took that angle. I tend to agree. The realities are, of course, that some of the decline has to do with deeper resources, and it is more expensive, and maybe declining grades and so on. But a lot of that also has to do with the political and commercial environments within which mining companies have to operate, in comparison with what they could get mining in gold in other countries, right?
Yeah.
So there is that global stage that's opening up, and more we are exposed to the business environments in other countries, and then the comparison is, well, do I invest $10 here, or do I invest $10 there? And in the end, we have to remain conscious of how we compete, not only from do we have the potential and the minerals, but do we have the environment in which it can be exploited.
And I mean, let's be frank, we don't compete well. I mean, the various metrics are all flawed. I mean, I personally am not a fan of the Fraser Institute metric, because it's an opinion poll by Canadians. And I mean, whatever part of the world is hot, they rate highly. I mean, right now, Saudi Arabia. Look how hot Saudi Arabia is. Well, it's really hot, both in temperature and in government. But, I mean, by whatever metric, South Africa doesn't. I mean, this is like the Springbok team getting knocked out in the first round of the World Cup. It is stupid. It's wrong. We are better than that. Now, South Africa as a mining destination is better than what we are performing right now. And that does go back to all of the issues, like the logistics and the things that are being fixed. From Eskom has got power, but can we still afford it? And Transnet may actually get, railway locomotives that fit on the rails. I mean, basic, stupid things that should never have been wrong. There's progress. The commodity prices, one must never lose sight of that. So the gold price in the last 3 years have made those very deep South African gold mines so profitable that Harmony is announcing expansion projects on them. So there's a commodity price component to that. The stuff that we mess up is the not political uncertainty. Unfortunately, we have political certainty. It seems like the ANC will rule forever. That's not a certainty we wanted. We want policy certainty. We want a certainty that doesn't matter whether it's a Trump or a Biden, the next morning things will be the same. Now we see how this plays out in the world's top economy. It's chaos when there's uncertainty. It impacts even in an economy like the US. Can you imagine how this pronouncements from different politicians play out as policy uncertainty in South Africa? More importantly, in the last 20 years, we have done almost no exploration. We have treated South Africa like a sunset industry. It is done. We have mined it all. Let's close shop. In the meantime, Namibia, Botswana has overtaken us. Not suddenly because they are better jurisdictions first and foremost, but just because they've allowed and funded and created an environment to suck in exploration dollar. So in 20 years from now, if we don't start to do things differently, in 20 years from now, some of these doomsday scenarios we paint may become true.
Yeah.
But we will shut down the mining industry, not because we've run out of stuff to mine, but because we've stopped looking for it.
I think you know that is critical. If I look at the PDAC conference, for example, in Toronto, speaking of the Canadians, you know, they create this global industry, and I've walked around there, and you've got the grizzly old geologist with snow on his boots and rolled up plans under his arms, you know, and he walks into a hall of investors ready to actually pay attention to what he's found. And invest in it potentially. And I wonder where that is. There seems to be much less opportunity for, let's call it, junior miners. And over and above that, to add insult to injury, there is less investment in exploration by the established mining companies. And so the net effect is we just don't know whether there's potential that can last us much longer than what we already know at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean that,
sorry, add to that something that you've written about also, and that is the state of the mining cadastre and let's call it the digital understanding of the country's resources and reserves, and that's in a state of I don't even know what to call it. It's horrible. And it seems to be such an easy problem to solve. I mean, the technology there exists off the shelf. You can just go and buy it and implement it, and problem solved. What do you think is the impact of our lack of infrastructure from a digital perspective at the governmental level on the confidence and the transparency that is required for investment to take place?
There's never a silver bullet. But I tell you, this is definitely a bullet. I mean, if we had a cadastre system that was transparent, there would have been a lot less noise and corruption, you know. The process of saying, I like the geological prospectivity of this area. You go online, you see it's available, you submit, you know, later that day, you know you're first in the queue. A week later, you've got approval. I mean, you can actually go to investors and say, I really own this area for, you know, purposes of exploration. Just think that compared to the current chaos where the court cases where I thought I own it, but then you, because you're politically connected, all through sheer incompetence, get an overlaying. I mean, it is a mess, and it's a self-made mess. It doesn't need to be like that, you know. It is. So when something is deliberately not working, you ask yourself, why is it deliberately, you know, I mean, we are not this incompetent, so it must be, you know, it must be corrupt competency. Or now the cadastre system is under implementation. It took 18 months because of the procurement processes that we are so proud of to procure something that existed. You and I would have walked into the shop and paid it and walked out. The government needs to go through processes. That procurement process then resulted in a system being chosen that was initially going to be rolled out. Then it was decided to implement it in the Western Cape for the benefits that there's little mining in the Western Cape, but also there's arguably some bureaucratic competencies there. That was going to be implemented by the end of June. We got told that will be implemented by the 1st of October. I'm not clairvoyant, but I do expect to hear that, yes, it's going, but it's, you know, slow because of bureaucracy. You know what? I'm now old enough to say it's okay. Take 6 more months, but just get it get the damn thing done, you know, because it is really, it's one of those base things. It's one of those things like, you know, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you can't even start to do certain other things. You know, if you don't have electricity, you're not a player. Now, a cadastre system is that. How did we fall so far behind? We can write books about that, you know, but can we fix it? And so I am optimistic that we will soon, hopefully in my lifetime, have a cadastre system, but it is not, you know, it's not there yet, and it was meant to be there.
I'm always interested in what's going on in the world of innovation, of course. I want to turn the attention to that in a minute, specifically when it comes to all things digital and automation and AI and so on. I know you've got opinions about that as well. But before we do, I just want to talk about one more policy thing. Our president has talked about the requirement or the need to move beyond mining to beneficiation and to actual manufacturing and so on. And there's of course a lot of truth to that, in an ideal scenario. Your opinion, how aggressively should South Africa be in the beneficiation of, for example, things like battery minerals and PGMs and rare earths and so on? Or is it a pipe dream that we should put on the shelf and make money from what we can in the meantime?
Yeah, sure. I tell you, I don't always have the same view. In other words, I have a view, and then 3 months later, I refuse to have that view because it would be so much better for the country if we do embrace value add beneficiation. I have to disclose that I am the chairman and co-owner of one of the last beneficiation businesses left in the country, MMC in Nelspruit. We beneficiate manganese. Why are we one of the last? Because it is a business that is in competition with China. That is madness. Why do you go into competition with China? Are you stupid? It is a business that adds electricity. Why would you do anything that is dependent on Eskom? Are you stupid? And in there lies the problem, is beneficiation often requires an ecosystem that no longer exists in South Africa. It requires an enabling environment. Now, competing with that is other government policies. We are absolutely obsessed that we must have a strong currency, whatever that means. A strong currency is to the advantage of people who import from China, and it is to the disadvantage of people who compete with China through exports. Every product I make in Nelspruit, my team make, we sell in dollars. I every month now get less for it in rands than what I got. In the meantime, Eskom's prices is going up by published 12%, in reality 15%. So the ecosystem for value adding doesn't really particularly exist. Then you go to who are we competing with? Literally, we make 3% of the world's pure electromanganese. China makes 97%. So it's not an unknown. You know who you compete with. You know what you're up against. If you go to Saudi Arabia, everybody's sort of favorite. There's a government that is creating an environment that is drawing businesses like mine in Nelspruit to Saudi Arabia, but not through legislation and forcing people to beneficiate, through tax incentives, through cheap green electricity, through building infrastructure, so I honestly, many days think, as South Africa, we have to give thanks to whoever decided that we will be a well-endowed minerally endowed country, and we should mine. And the pit to port model, as much as it gets criticized, I mean, we have no ability to convert iron ore into steel in competition with China. But we've got fantastic iron ore that the world wants. In platinum, we do significant beneficiation all the way through to catalyst, because we are a significant player. Right now, the government has to put tariffs and export taxes on our chrome. We produce most of the world's top quality chrome, but in order to just take it one step up to ferrochrome, you need electricity. Where is that going to come from at an affordable price? So beneficiation, that whether that's downstream, upstream, that beneficiation, as one of the few players in that space, I'm unconvinced. What we don't do enough of is, as an industry, what can we do in terms of localization, local procurement? In South Africa, at some states, thanks to gold mining, you didn't have to go anywhere else in the world for anything. It was made in Boksburg, Springs, Benoni. I mean, it happened in Rustenburg. Right now, we mine as a country in scale much more significantly, but we've given up on the reindustrialization through local procurement, much more legitimate space. I think if the mining companies get serious about that, then I think we can, add value, perhaps through the input side of our business. But that's such a long answer. And as I say, I mean, if in 3 months from now we talk again, I may have a slightly different view, because it's not simple. MP. I mean, it's simple to have a view, an ideological view, and that's where our government is. Ideologically, we must beneficiate. Yes, but, and where's the enabling environment? And
Or it's almost a yes and, it's not the opposite of, but it is, well, in order to get there, you've got to start somewhere and build up to where you want to go, right? Speaking of things that are a reality, we have unemployment in South Africa, and we've got lots of people who are neither stupid nor untrained that are not participating in the economy. And certainly mining, like other primary industries, has a massive potential contribution that can be unlocked. But then you've got this threat standing in the wings of the stage here of automation and AI, and people are concerned what the impact of that would be, specifically in mines where we've got such a huge complement of people working. Do you think that automation is a threat to South Africans, I should say, that people working in the mines, or is it really going to just be a shift from one kind of person that works there to another kind of person? And how should we as an industry think about doing that just transition that can be done?
Yeah, so firstly, I would just ask us to not pretend that this isn't a 30-year or a 40-year journey and we're talking about the next phase of it. So automation, mechanization is not new, Yeah, of course, at its phase, there's then the breakthrough in terms of computing capacity, and now it's AI, and then we label these things with this industrial revolution and that one, and, but automation and mechanization has been a part of the industry I have been in for 45 years. And yes, you could say that means less people go underground into a harsh environment. Now, what's wrong with that? That's a fantastic positive, Are there more people sitting in offices behind computers designing the mines to be safer? Yes. Now, what's wrong with that? That's a positive, And so I honestly think enabling people with technology is a fantastic thing, really. Yes, at a basic level, what does mines do? It creates jobs for the skills we have, for the very South Africans we have. But you and I both come from a point of view that South Africans, in some cases, maybe not even skilled in the school sense, but that doesn't make them stupid. You know what I mean? I do think we have the same. If you've got 60 million people, your 60 million people are highly likely to be similar to the 60 million Americans who would choose as a cohort.
Yeah,
and so I do think,
while I would agree with you there, I do think there's that there's that opportunity to transition as a as a country from a skills economy into a knowledge economy. And you have to have a critical weight in the knowledge economy to be able to compete globally.
I'm really completely aligned with that thinking. I do agree completely with that. And this is really why I spend quite a bit of time involved in the space of how do we create our next generation of mining engineers, just to be very specific, And there are people who say that, why would you give a bursary for a mining engineer if there's going to be no mining industry? Well, firstly, that's completely self-fulfilling logic. And secondly, that skill space, the knowledge that goes into the training of these technically qualified people, they end up in banks. They end up in the startups that, develop the technology. They go and work in the AI space and take fantastic computing capacity into products that the mines can use, and plug into. And so I think the theme that I get frustrated, MP, that we don't discuss enough in South Africa is we should have an obsession to have a growing economy. We start off with, whatever, redistribution. We start off with, we give it all sorts of labels, but why don't we just first grow the economy? And if we grow the economy, then these other challenges will become visible, but they will be easier to handle. It is the absence of economic growth, that we now have to fight about. But the job I'm going to lose in the coal power station, where am I going to get the supplement? Well, in a growing economy, there are new opportunities. There are new
The rising
jobs.
tide raises all ships, right?
Yeah. So I think any just transition, and I mean, it shouldn't be a just energy transition. An economy is constantly transitioning from something that worked well in the past, that is flawed today, that will be unsustainable in the future. In that journey of transition, I mean, if there's growth, people will adjust. I mean, they will move from Witbank in Mpumalanga to Stellenbosch, heaven forbid, because there's a job there. And I mean, I can't believe any rational person would do that. But hey, you may find people who do that for economic opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's true that, I mean, you just have to look at the basic, what do you call it, when people move from rural areas into cities?
Urbanization and the migration.
Urbanization, thank you. There's no rule that says thou shalt urbanize. It just happens because opportunity is here. And I think if we are serious about generating the opportunity and letting industry, giving them free enough reins so that the innovativeness that is here can actually develop into something that is commercially viable, then things will happen all by itself. And then, you don't have to design everything to the nth degree. If the environment is good, the plants will grow.
Yeah. And this is really the sort of central planning done right, which we think China is doing perhaps. But I mean, the central planning and everything must be pre-decided and ordained by government versus the creating an enabling environment. You can clearly hear which school I'm in. Create an environment, set the people free. Quite honestly, corporately at Harmony, that was one of the big dreams I had, is why don't we set the people free? Why don't we allow them to think? Why don't we, let them do things differently? Now, that flies in the face of protocols and standard operating procedures, and I respect all of that. But I mean, if you create the right environment, then people surprise you. And I must tell you, they surprise you on the upside all the time, and when we talk about technology and adoption of new ideas, how can I, as a 60-something-year-old old fart with lots of experience of the past, how can I be the one who will bring the new technology wisely into the industry? It is a 20-year-old who's going to make a bigger contribution there rather than me. And I mean, that is just something we must keep on.
But that 20-year-old engineer lacks business wisdom, lacks all kinds of experience of how to deal with the naysayers, how to deal with international trade, etc., etc. So it is, as always, it is a collaborative environment, and I always I'm on the side that says you shouldn't meddle too much. Let's work on equality of opportunity, not so much on equality of outcome. And maybe, people will surprise us on the upside, as you just said.
Yeah, I'm obviously a little bit more of a revolutionary. I don't think a lot of what we do is so fantastic that it should be defended with our life. So I do fall a little bit more in because if we just accept that our kids and their kids are going to inherit this world from us, then surely our responsibility is to enable them to do better than what we did, And so I have a lot of experience. I mean, it's visible on my face, the scars. I have the experience. I respect experience, but I'm just saying, it's not, it is definitely the combination. And those of us with experience just have to acknowledge that there are areas when the bright young minds are going to think differently. And how do we embrace that? And we are the guardrails, of course. We are there to stop them from doing the stupid things we've already done.
Or be convinced that it's not so stupid, maybe. Bernard,
That too,
I
yeah.
want to ask you, speaking of sharing your wisdom, where should listeners go to follow your thinking, and what should they read next?
Sure. I mean, my first appeal is please read. I mean, it is, and it's more than Twitter. It's not
Mm,
even my newsletter on LinkedIn, that zero bullshit. I mean, just read widely. Open your mind to all sorts of other
mm,
thoughts, ideas, because that is when we uniquely, each one of us, distill what we see out there and bring it back and apply it to our circumstances. I am very worried that we become lazy to read, including me. I
mm,
spend 2 hours on Twitter and I pretend that I have read. No, I've
mm,
flicked and I've,
mm,
I've
mm,
opened the odd thing and so reading and read anything and read and in your technical field and read beyond that. If the world reads, I tell you, we'll be a better place. Obviously, I am a deep believer in technical expertise. I mean, if you want to go into gold mining and you do not understand mining or gold, I mean, then you're a pretender, then you are fake,
mm,
then you
mm,
are, I mean, so I unashamedly still think I want to engage with people who are experts in their field. I want to not necessarily therefore think their view is the only view, but I want to, when I push against somebody, I want to find substance. And when they
mm,
push against
mm,
me, hopefully they find substance. Um, so if you don't spend a healthy portion of your time, I mean, if you run an hour a day, fantastic. I try and do that. If you don't read an hour a day, well, then you value your body higher than what you value your mind. Is that really
mm,
what you are telling me? So
mm,
simple,
mm,
people we all should just keep on being on a journey of growth
mm.
and learning. And
And
that
I like the analogy with the body, because also if you do running and exercise, it is resistance training that actually makes you develop. And it should be the same with your mind, right? Staying in your own echo chamber and learning only what you know about. It's nice, but that's not learning, and that doesn't really develop you in such a way that you would become the useful corporate citizen that you talked about earlier. But thank you so
absolutely.
much. I think we should probably bring this to a close. But before we do, I want to ask you the same question I ask most of my other guests, and that is, outside of talking mining and talking, politics and industrial things, what is it that you do to relax, and what is it that makes you you?
Oh, I I actually do run.
Hmm.
I have recently reestablished a healthy pattern of getting to 200 kilometers a month, jogging, obviously, age appropriate speed and all. I
That sounds great.
yeah, but it's also my thinking time.
Mhm.
I surprised people by saying in COVID, my young son, who's now second year mechanical engineering student, and I got sucked into a hobby of Ankole farming, those beautiful
Mhm.
cattle,
Mhm.
as we do, or any hobby then becomes a business. And so I
Mhm.
am actively involved in Ankole farming as opposed to just
Okay.
cattle farming, which we were doing.
Mhm.
And then obviously as a family, church and family is critical parts of who we are. It is
Mm.
our overlap. It is our where we share deep values, and from there we try and go into the world
Mm.
individually, but always knowing that we grounded together, where it really matters. So I
Mm.
would like to
Mm.
think that is a sort of hopefully mostly defining who I think I am.
Mm. Bernard, it's been such a pleasure having you on, and I'm sure everyone else would also like to listen more and more, but there are other opportunities too. And all the best with the Joburg Mining Indaba coming up tomorrow, the next week, or for the next week, I should say, and with all of the other endeavors that you're busy with. And thank you for being a voice of reason to the industry and in the industry. Certainly, speaking for more than just myself, you are appreciated and your views make a difference. Thanks so much for what you're doing.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.